Cut off from their deep pockets and stuck in a diplomatic limbo, back in 1986, the Marcoses struggled to find a place to call home in Hawaii.
The former Philippine president arrived at 5577 Kalanianaole Highway around 8:30 last night. It was the first time Marcos had left Hickam Air Force Base since he and a party of about 90 arrived here from Manila 27 days ago. Last night's move was made with the assistance of Secret Service agents, U.S. Air Force personnel, and plainclothes officers of the Honolulu Police Department. And it didn't take very long for the first protesters to arrive. Honolulu attorney Eric Seitz and a friend showed up with protest signs less than an hour after the Marcoses moved in.
Frankly, I've always been offended by the United States support for Marcos, but I'm even more offended by the fact that he's here in Niu Valley, or that he isn't being sent back to the Philippines to face the legitimate feelings of the Filipino people, who I think would hang him if he were sent back.
Marcos moves into my neighborhood, something clicked, and I said, that's too much, that's it. I gotta come out with my sign, I gotta show everybody I oppose it. He's a murderer, he's a dictator, he's a fascist, what can you say?
Secret Service here? Hey, cut it out! I'm going with you! Stop it!
Seitz was detained briefly by the Secret Service because his protest sign included an indirect threat. He was taken into the house and questioned, but later released without charges. It's not certain how long Ferdinand and Imelda planned to live in the 4-bedroom beachfront house, but they were clearly running out of time at Hickam Air Force Base. They had been promised security and housing for up to a month. They're on their own now in a rented home, but the security remains in place. Efforts to find the Marcoses a safe haven in another country have so far been unsuccessful.
Not everyone saw the Marcos regime as an evil dictatorship. In an attempt to capitalize on that support, the couple began to make some rare but dramatic appearances around Honolulu.
They have a name for themselves, these people who carpooled and rode buses and walked to a street corner in Old Kalihi, where the president of the group Friends of Marcos has a travel agency. They call themselves the Silent Majority, Ilocanos with ties to Marcos's home province in Ilocos Norte, transplanted Filipinos who say they have until now quietly borne the indignities of exaggerated and false reporting about their hero.
Oh yeah, they always take time. They would not leave until the people leaves. Oh yeah, because this is the first time that the Filipino people see them. And of course they like to see them, and of course they like Mrs. Marcos and President Marcos would like to see them too.
Most media really in Hawaii are all for Aquino, pro-Aquinos, not all for Marcos at all.
They're wealthy, sure, that's a president. I mean, who doesn't? President Reagan lives in the White House.
Nobody, how much you poison our mind, we are still loyal to him. He's the best president the Philippines has ever had.
It was a crowd that Imelda Marcos knew would be more than receptive. She wore the same simple dress that she wore when she and her husband faced the cameras for a news conference at Hickam, and she offered herself for press-the-flesh populism. The crowd surged forward to envelop her in support, to comfort her. And when the crowd pressed too close for comfort, supporters moved to protect her, targeting the big TV news cameras first.
Okay, media, get back!
Well, I think for her it was maybe a level of comfort that she can amass this kind of reaction outside of her own country. So, I mean, all you're doing is playing it on a smaller stage, but it's the same routine. And she was always genuinely very open to her people.
She was helped onto an old table and the crowd saluted her. She was not there to talk with reporters, but Newsroom 9 got in a couple of quick questions in the highly charged atmosphere.
Mrs. Marcos, could you tell me how you feel to be in this country?
Homesick.
Do you have anything to say to Filipinos here who feel not as happy as these Filipinos?
And do not intend to return to the Philippines unless I am needed there. If my return will start a civil war, the answer is no.
So what would it take for you to go back to the Philippines?
What do you think? It would be a call by the people themselves. I don't intend to go there voluntarily offering my services and insisting that I be president.
But it never happened. I mean, you know, there was never a moment, there was never a time when we thought he was actually going to leave. I mean, you know, or be allowed to go back to the Philippines.
After many attempts to move to another country failed, the Marcoses remained in Hawaii until Ferdinand's death in 1989 at the age of 72.
That's interesting.
Imelda Marcos was wrapping up an interview yesterday when she got the call. There was another crisis. Her husband's heart had stopped. Imelda went rushing to St. Francis Hospital.
So much to be done in all fronts, for country, for your home, for your needs, for your health.
By the time she got to St. Francis, Ferdinand Marcos was on an internal pacemaker. His condition seemed to stabilize, raising the possibility that he would once again rally. But as the evening wore on, hope began to dim. Doctors said kidney and lung failure and a widespread infection added to the cardiac arrest that led to Marcos's death. That came shortly after the arrival from California of Marcos's son, Ferdinand Jr., who's known as Bong Bong.
When Bong Bong arrived, I think he felt that his son was there, so he opened his eyes. And after opening his eyes, that was it. His accomplishments are beyond imagination. As I said, I am very sure every Filipino, they might not realize it now, but I'm very sure every Filipino will say that President Marcos was the greatest president, and history will prove this.
And, you know, she carried herself, you know, I guess like the way Jackie Kennedy did after the president died, you know, American president Kennedy died, you know. She just held her level to that standard, and more so after he died. You can imagine what was going through her mind and her heart, but she now sort of felt like this is her time to kind of speak for him or to take his place. And she was, you know, she did that.
The president will never leave my heart and will never die as far as I'm concerned. He will always be there. In fact, he will be all the time there. In spirit, of course. But when you have become so intimately involved with another human being, there can never be a separation again.
Good afternoon, it's 12:58. You're on KISS AM Radio. It is true, and a lot of people have been in shock about what has happened over the last 8 to 10 hours.
This radio station is the only one here that caters to Filipinos. And today its switchboards lit up. Some people were angry that the flags at the Philippine consulate will not be flown at half-staff.
Since President Marcos was the sixth president and Aquino was only a senator, and they did that to Aquino, why can't they do that to ex-President Marcos?
Some say his body should be allowed home.
Can we do something about it, or we cannot do nothing?
Here in Hawaii, we cannot do anything about it.
Following his death, President Corazon Aquino would not allow entry of Marcos's remains into the Philippines.
I have always considered only one thing, his wish, and the wish of every Filipino to be buried and led to rest in peace in his motherland.
So much has happened since the death of Ferdinand Marcos less than 24 hours ago. More recently, his body was made available for viewing, as a deluge of reporters was allowed into the Marcos home. Leading the way, Imelda Marcos, still fighting for her husband's right to return to the Philippines.
How can you find this man dangerous man to security when he is now resting in peace forever?
Imelda Marcos now stands alone against criminal charges for allegedly looting her country of billions. She will vindicate herself, she says, once she resolves the long-standing issue of whether Marcos's body can return to his homeland.
This is so cruel, so inhuman, and so immoral.
His rule changed our country beyond recognition. In what ways he changed it, I leave to others and to history to describe.
But when I came to Manila, I had an interview with President Aquino. And I never forget this. I said, I can't remember everything, but I remember, how can you not allow him to come back? I mean, if he's already deceased, what's the big deal? That was my question. And she was very strong and said, basically, dead or alive, if he returns, it will create upheaval in our country. And I have to be aware of that. And I went, oh, okay. Because that's how strong Marcos was. And she knew it, and she wasn't gonna, she wasn't gonna make light of it. So she said, basically, no, I'm not gonna let him come back.
He not only stole and killed and did all those nasty things, robbing the country blind, but he let down a whole country that had, for a long time, experience with democratic institutions. So he was a classic dictator in that sense. And, he got his due deserts when he was overthrown, and he died in obscurity.
Still, the world wanted to know what happened to the money, and would the Marcoses be held accountable? Imelda Marcos would face a highly publicized trial in New York City on charges that she raided the country's treasury and invested the money in the United States. She was acquitted.
It is the most publicized return to the Philippines since General Douglas MacArthur's during World War II.
Marcos, how are you feeling? Very excited and very happy.
Imelda Marcos.
You're not afraid? No.
And her entourage are leaving New York. Where are you going this morning? What's your schedule?
To the airport.
But it's not that simple. You've been through so much in this country. What should we think of Imelda Marcos?
I think now that they're starting to see the real Imelda, what is in my heart, not only the packaging outside. When I was deprived of country and everything, people started to relate to the real me. Please be careful. Be careful.
Careful to the ground.
Not the symbol, but the real Imelda. I am truly very grateful to this country for making me real.
It was a long flight, and we all thought about the same thing. What was it going to be like when we landed? I think I'm going to get blown up in this plane with her. And no, we didn't. The whole airport was filled with their supporters.
Keep going, keep moving, keep moving.
Just like General MacArthur, Imelda Marcos has returned. She is fighting her own war for the hearts and minds of Filipinos.
We love Imelda. Yeah. Always.
The same Filipinos who threw her out of the country 5 years ago.
The Marcoses stole money from the Philippines? Yeah. Sure. He stole the money. He stole the money? No.
And while she is delighted to face the crowds in the streets, she also must face charges in court.
Kung down daw sa New York, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
What was your feelings about her being allowed to go back to the Philippines and then rise to power again?
It's not so much what she thinks about what everybody thinks, but how is it that Filipinos in that part of the world is still elected her to a position of power again? But you see, as I said, the relationship was just so that they still continued to hold power. Even when they were out of real power, they had still so much money, they still had so much influence.
The people in the islands know what Marcos did for our country, you see. That is why they supported him. And that's why the people love Marcos even now, until now.
Well, I think it's very discouraging, upsetting that they're still in power, but the money that they've hidden and that they still have access to is money that they use to keep themselves in power.
So you kind of knew that it ain't over. It ain't over well from that. And I'm hoping that Imelda's children, who are now in positions of power, will have learned from what they had to grow up and experience, all the things that they were accused of doing, their parents, that they can learn from that and be better about it and not repeat history.
We all know Imelda Marcos, right? Her famous shoe collection. Well, apparently it's ruined. More than 1,200 pairs of shoes were left in storage after the one-time First Lady fled the country in 1986. Officials say over the years, the shoes were damaged by termites, mold, and storms. Those shoes, of course, were seen as a symbol of the excesses and corruption of her husband's dictatorship.